Hey y'all, I have a special treat for you this week on the podcast. We are part of a small network of podcasts, and we are giving a view into some of those other podcasts. This week you will hear the Milwaukee Mafia podcast, where we dive deep into riveting history of organized crime in the Brew City of Milwaukee. Join us as we explore the notorious underworld figures, gripping tales of bootlegging, and the shadowy dealings that shape Milwaukee's past, from the infamous beer wars to the rise and fall of influential crime bosses. This podcast uncovers the secrets and scandals of the Milwaukee Mafia. So hang tight to hear one of my favorite episodes of the Milwaukee podcast, and if you enjoy it, subscribe to it today.
You're listening to Milwaukee Mafia, your podcast dose of Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Milwaukee Mafia podcast. I'm Eric.
I'm Gavin.
And we are back again. What are we talking about today, Gavin?
We're going to talk about Milwaukee
and the Mafia, right?
The Mafia. So a few episodes back, we talked about Robert Warren, who became the Attorney General in Wisconsin. And Robert Warren is going to be probably the biggest name in trying to stop Frank Ballestry from being Frank. And so this is a very short episode, but it's going to kind of give an early example of what he's doing. We're going to have an episode coming up soon where he goes full force. Like he is not messing around, but this is sort of like his opening shot here.
So this is what he gets elected or whatever, and he says, I'm going to bring down organized crime, and this is the first sign that you're like, maybe he really is going to.
Yes.
Is that kind of it? Okay.
Yeah. So I did that, and that was way too short. So I've actually added in here, we're going to make this the bookends. The bookends, that's what I'm looking for. The bookends of this are going to be talking about Alderman Robert Gendusa, which really has nothing to do with anything, but just to kind of put some historical context in here.
Okay.
And add the history into this, because I like that stuff. Robert Gendusa, born in Milwaukee, 1921. His parents are Sicilian immigrants. Through marriage, he is connected to some low-level Milwaukee mob figures, but these are pretty loose links, and I don't personally believe that Robert Gendusa had really any organized crime ties. I feel like if you're in the Sicilian community in Milwaukee, if you look hard enough, you can probably find some in-laws with just about anyone. So, he becomes an alderman in Milwaukee, really comes to public prominence in 1964 when he's on the city council, and he's one of the people leading the charge to keep the Milwaukee Braves in Milwaukee.
Okay.
That fails.
Obviously.
Yeah. People who don't know, Milwaukee had a team called the Milwaukee Braves. The Braves left, went to Atlanta, and then Milwaukee later got another team. Mm-hmm. They tried to keep the Braves in Milwaukee. They failed. Gendusa got really well known in 1967 and 1968 during the race riots. I feel like we've talked about the race riots on an episode.
I would think it's definitely worth bringing it back up what it is, because I don't remember. So,
okay. So nationwide in the late 60s, the black community was having protests and in some cases very violent riots in major cities trying to get expanded rights. That included in Milwaukee, where they were pushing for what was then called open housing, which basically means non-discrimination in who can get a house or, rent or whatever. So they were protesting that. I feel like we talked about this. Maybe we didn't, but the big pushback came from the Polish community, of all things. The Polish community really didn't like the black community. And of course, that's not true, because There's going to be a Polish person out there's like, no, I got no problem. Yes, not everybody in the Polish community, but largely they were the ones who got the public recognition as pushing back. Mm-hmm. Strangely, Jendusa, in a study about this, was identified as Polish. He is not Polish at all. So, like, when I read on the race riot, I mean, I read about this was months ago. I read about it maybe a year ago at this point. And, and I'm like, I don't think Jendusa is Polish. Now I can definitely tell you he's not Polish. So that makes me question some of the things that they came up with in that study. But anyway, so he's a prominent member of the city council at the time. And then Martin Luther King gets shot in 1968. Not in Milwaukee, but that, although, Martin Luther King getting shot, not cool, did a lot to move things forward.
Right.
Milwaukee now, although they had kind of resisted passing open housing laws, suddenly now passed their open housing laws. They were like, okay, if King is getting shot, things are out of hand. So like, we'll make some concessions and we'll pass the open housing laws. Now, this is way outside the scope of this podcast, but for anyone who doesn't know, Milwaukee has a reputation for being one of the worst segregated cities in the country.
Really?
You don't know this?
To this day?
Oh, yeah. You don't know this?
Wait, I guess I never really thought about it.
Oh, no. Dude, look it up. Milwaukee today is still considered like top segregation as far as cities go.
And is that stat measured across all general races, or is it just usually like a black-white thing?
That's a great question. I think they typically are referring to the black-white thing. But,
okay.
Yeah. But yeah, no, like what Milwaukee calls like the inner core, like, yeah, that situation hasn't really gotten better in 60 years. Around the same time here, he runs to be council president, and he wins that. He beats Martin Schreiber, and Martin Schreiber is, in retrospect, a much bigger name, so that's a good move for him. Going into 1969, the ward that he represented has 53,000 people. So you got to keep that in mind when you're talking about Milwaukee aldermen here. Like, if you're talking about an alderman in a smaller town, alderman is nothing. Alderman is piddly. Mm-hmm. And what an alderman says doesn't matter. Nobody cares. Most people probably don't know who their alderman is. But in Milwaukee, your alderman at this time, and this would not have changed a whole lot, in this time represented 53,000 people. So they're like the mayor of a good-sized town. Right.
Whereas, like, if we looked at an alderman in Appleton, they probably have, like, 3,000 people under him.
Sure.
Or something like that. Yeah.
Something like that. It's still something, but they don't really have a lot of political power. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, like, when he's... An alderman in itself is a big deal in Milwaukee, but then when you're the council president, it's an even bigger deal because then you kind of, steer the conversation. So he's a pretty important figure. Coming into 1969, this is when Robert Warren comes in to be Attorney General. And if people can recall from the few episodes back, he releases his idea for what he wants to see crime bills to be passed. And it's a long list of things, some of which are kind of ridiculous. The things that people don't like are every liquor license being passed on the state level instead of on the local level. People don't really like that. But then other things where he's sort of more actively like, how can we target people that are known criminals? They kind of like that. I mean, generally speaking, when people say, I want to be tougher on crime, people like that. There's not a lot of people who then were like, no, I don't think we should be as tough on crime. That's a hard sell.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit on that other Robert Warren episode where it's kind of like he he came out on this platform probably asking for things that probably weren't appropriate, but some of the people were supporting him in that theory because he was tying it to this, we're going to get rid of criminals.
Right.
So
yeah, I'm going to mention this as we're recording today. We're going into the Wisconsin Supreme Court election, and I'm not gonna make any comments as far as that goes. This is not a political podcast, but it's interesting that both candidates in the Wisconsin Supreme Court, their ads are basically saying that the other person is too soft on crime.
Yep.
Like they're both kind of accusing each other of like letting like sex predators loose and things like that. So like everybody agrees like this is the thing that, people want. They want you to be tough on things. So it's like now it's like, okay, which one of you is tougher? So it's like not making any comment politically on that, just because of the time that we're recording this. Like, yep, this is still something that I mean apparently works because they still use it.
Well, and I think that's one of the things we've learned from this podcast is that politics just really never changes.
No,
they've been fighting about the same shit forever.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so going into 1970, now we're on our timeline here. Going into 1970, Robert Warren comes down and he is objecting to the fact that taverns associated with Frank Balestrieri have liquor licenses. And he's telling the Milwaukee City Council, when they come up for renewal this year, do not renew the licenses. He's like, everybody knows which clubs he's associated with, whether his name's on it or not. You know which ones are his. Do not renew these licenses. So he's putting his foot down on that. He's like, this is how we're going to get him.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to assume that does not work.
Well, we'll see. On June 8th, 1970, after a day of golfing in Mequon, Alderman Robert Gendusa and Alderman William Drew stopped in to Fazio's on Jackson at 11:30 at night. Very long day of golfing.
Mm-hmm.
By sheer coincidence, Frank Balestrieri stopped in shortly thereafter, and the three men briefly had a talk. Somehow word gets out about these three having a conversation. Local TV network WTMJ aired an editorial criticizing the Common Council for granting tavern licenses to Frank Balestrieri's relatives and associates. So they've kind of picked up on the Robert Warren train here too, and they're like, yeah, why do you guys keep giving him licenses? The following night, Joseph Balestrieri, Frank's son, went on TV to fight back against, quote, the libels, treacheries, and dreams leveled by unscrupulous politicians. He says, too long have we Balestrieris been silent, and too long has our silence not only given spur to our detractors, but has also served as an inference of legitimacy to their baseless accusations. The situation reached the acme of intolerance earlier this week when certain public officials, acting on half-truths and lies, would have stopped members of my family and friends from the most basic right of earning a living and supporting their families in an honest, licensed enterprise. We're all too familiar with the spectacular charge leveled against my father by Senator McClellan that he is a member of that mythical organization whose name isn't worth mentioning. We categorically deny this. Joe Balestrieri added, Senator McClellan is the grandest of all character assassins. Joe Balestrieri, always fun to quote because I love the way that he speaks and writes. But here, so this is a few years earlier, Senator McClellan was on the Senate floor, and he publicly identified the heads of the Mafia in the United States. And so he identified Frank Balestrieri as the head of the Mafia in Milwaukee. Mm-hmm. And ever since that point, the newspapers and politicians and whatever else they can point back to that. So, like, if the newspaper wants to say Frank Balestrieri, head of the Mafia, and they don't want to get sued for saying that, they can be like, Frank Balestrieri, according to Senator McClellan, the head of the Mafia, you know?
Clever.
Yeah.
Clever.
Yeah. So ever since like this was publicly declared, like now anybody can say it because you just point at this guy and this guy's like made it, you know, okay to say. It's on the record.
That's really funny that, I mean, I guess I never really thought about that, but that makes complete sense. Like how big of a deal that probably was for somebody to finally come out and publicly say, these are the people that are in charge.
Yeah. You know? It was kind of a big deal. On July 1st, 1970, Alderman William Drew, one of the two men who were golfing, was called into the state attorney general's office. The state attorney general's office asked him about a meeting that Drew had with Frank Balestrieri. Somehow word got out that he had a quote-unquote meeting with him.
Now, this is the politician that was met up with him after golfing?
Yes.
I mean, just by chance?
Just by chance.
Yeah. Okay.
We don't know really what happened in the meeting with the state attorney general's office, but that afternoon, Drew went to the Common Council, the Milwaukee City Council, and made a speech asking that Balestrieri's tavern license be reinstated. Because, yes, I know that the attorney general is objecting to this. And Drew says to the other alderman, I fully realize I'm holding myself up to a great deal of harassment from the attorney general, which began this morning, and apparently from the district attorney. He goes, despite that, I think the license should be renewed. When asked to comment, Executive Administrator Daniel Hanley of the attorney general's office said the interview, quote, was not a question of harassment, but a question of seeking information from public officials. The attorney general is not in the business of harassment. He is in the business of enforcing the statutes of the state and calling to the attention of the appropriate units of government the violations of law taking place. Hanley said that Drew and another alderman met with Balestrieri at Fazio's on Jackson shortly before the Common Council was set to vote on renewing the license, and he found the timing to be suspicious. Hanley added, we have corresponded with the council on 2 occasions and called to its attention the questions of criminal violations in the case involving the nightclubs and bars in question. Again, I don't know who told the Attorney General's office that these guys were all at Fazio's at the same time. That I have no idea. Mm-hmm. But the Attorney General's office is pouncing on this. Mm-hmm. And that's what this episode, like I said, it's real short, but that's what this episode is like the focus I want it to be on, is the Attorney General knows that he has no authority whatsoever about renewing or not renewing a tavern license. Like, that is not the Attorney General's job. But if he can put pressure on the local government or embarrass the people who are on the city council, he could, apparently he thinks, he can get them to do what he wants them to do. So this is like Robert Warren's first real move here, is if Frank Balestrieri's money comes from running bars, take away his bars. I don't have the authority to do it, so I'm going to embarrass the people who have the authority to do it.
And apply pressure on them to do it.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, I would assume that in this scenario, because what inevitably happens, do they take these licenses? I assume they don't.
They do not. There's the second round that'll come in a later episode, but at this point, no, they don't.
Okay, because I mean, to me, the cause for taking it away seems to be a little outside of the scope of. I mean, I guess I wouldn't. It's probably not illegal from their perspective to not renew because they have the right to not renew anybody's liquor license, right?
Sure.
They don't really have to give a reason for that. But it still does seem like
I imagine they could technically get sued if they don't have a reason, but in theory, yeah, they don't have to.
Yeah, but still very shady to, I mean, if the bar is doing nothing wrong, it's just an institution that's selling alcohol within the confines of the law. they really have no right to take away their liquor license.
Yeah.
And the excuse that, well, this guy might be a mafia member and he's associated with it is not a valid reason to take a liquor license away.
Right. So a couple days later, Alderman Robert Gendusa comes forward and he publicly identifies himself as the other alderman. Up to this point, only Drew was publicly identified as meeting with Balistrieri. They would say Drew and another alderman. Now Robert Gendusa comes forward and he's like, I was the other alderman. And again, here he's like the president of the council. So he's like the top member of the city council here. He comes forward and he's like, I'm the guy. And he goes to the press and he asks them, was I supposed to just leave because Balistrieri walked in? We talked to the man. If it gets to the point where a public official can't stop in a public place, then something is wrong. Everybody's so surprised that I know him. When he walked in, I didn't panic and run out of the bar. I certainly didn't have an assignment to meet up with him. We did not go into a back room and have a secret meeting. We've known each other. Both of our sons attended Marquette High School. There's nothing suspicious going on here.
I kind of like this guy.
Yeah.
It's just matter-of-factly like, come on, people. Like,
but yeah, that's like the thing. And that's a valid point. If there's like some kind of agreement, hey, make sure my license gets renewed. Yeah, you aren't necessarily going to do that in the middle of a room where everybody's there. Mm-hmm. So it's a valid point. But
and that right there just goes back to too, like the optics of politics, where like you have to be so careful with everything you do because people will just pounce on you for doing what seems to be completely, not even a big deal. Like I saw somebody in a bar and I stopped, and yeah, you can use, well, it was the mafia boss, but yeah. Still,
Yeah. So this to me is like the interesting thing where you have to understand what the different levels of political power are and where they're appropriate. Now, when Robert Warren comes out and he goes, these are all the things I'd like to do to change the law, Robert Gendusa says, those all sound great. So it's not that Gendusa doesn't like the Attorney General. That's not the case at all. They're generally in agreement. But once Warren is saying this is what the council should do, the president of the council doesn't particularly like that because that's not his place. Mm-hmm. Now, this is different than if the chief of police comes in. If the chief of police shows up at a city council meeting or the licensing committee meeting, whatever, and the chief of police says, I'm opposing the renewal of these licenses for these reasons, they don't have to follow his recommendation.
But they're going to take it into account.
And that's going to mean a whole lot more to them because the chief of police is the person who is monitoring the local bars. It is not the attorney general. Mm-hmm. It is not the attorney general's job to do that. So the attorney general trying to micromanage a city council is not rubbing the city council the right way.
Right.
So this, that move on Robert Warren's part at this point fails because people don't like it when they're told what to do by somebody who doesn't have the authority to tell them what to do.
So are you implying then that from your perspective, the reason why Balistrieri this time around is able to keep his licenses is because basically Robert Warren is attacking this committee? That's probably the reason why the committee said, no, we'll just renew them.
No, I mean, if Robert Warren wouldn't have said anything at all, the licenses would have got renewed.
Well, obviously.
But all I'm saying is they would not have been renewed if the city council rolled over and said, okay, well, the attorney general doesn't like it, so I guess we'll not renew. So take that how you will, you know. I don't think they have any cause to not renew them, but they certainly could have caved in and said, well, the attorney general is the top law enforcement person in the state. So when they tell you something, generally you want to do what they tell you to do.
Right. I think,
but they don't actually have the authority to do this.
Yeah. I guess the way I look at it is that the act of the attorney general saying you should not renew these, it took a lot from the city council to ignore his request and just renew them anyways.
I think it took a little bit of guts. I mean, keep in mind, this is Milwaukee. It's by far the largest city in the state. Had this been some piddly town and the attorney general comes in, I don't know, but I feel like maybe they could be pressured more. Whereas in Milwaukee, like, I don't know about the council president. The council president is probably pretty politically powerful, but definitely the mayor of Milwaukee. The mayor of Milwaukee is like, what, second to the general? Mm-hmm. The governor, as far as like political standing in the state. So you can't push Milwaukee around.
Yeah, I guess I can see that in. And I also you got to look at it like this is something that Robert Warren probably should have spoken with the mayor of Milwaukee about, and then it should have trickled down to the city council. But he went directly to the city council, more or less.
He went to the city council. He made the announcement that that's how he felt about it, and then I don't know whether he waited to see how they felt about it, but before they even got to the voting, he publicly embarrasses them by saying they had this shady meeting, which is probably mischaracterizing what happened.
Mm. It's a crazy story, though. I mean,
yeah. So that's pretty much what comes of that. Robert Gendusa goes on to do some noteworthy things. He helps negotiate the Milwaukee Bucks staying in Milwaukee, succeeds on that. Couldn't keep the Braves in Milwaukee, but kept the Bucks. That was a tricky negotiation because, you know, this is one of those stories that's going to sound like it happened today. This is 1973, and it was basically the owner of the Bucks at the time being like, well, we'll stay in Milwaukee if Milwaukee will help us build a bigger stadium or bigger arena. And Milwaukee is like, well, why do we want to invest government money in your personal business? But they know that having the Bucks is an economic booster, so ultimately they come to a deal. This happens in sports all the time.
Yeah, nowadays it's not like help us build an arena. Now it's you're going to build us an arena.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, it's kind of weird because I was reading like the articles about it. And I'm like, yeah, this is the same thing, 50 years later, still the same thing. And it seems like they used to characterize it as sort of like blackmail because it's like, if you don't do this, we'll leave your city. And now, that's still like, if you don't do this, we'll leave your city. But doesn't sound like blackmail anymore. Now it just sounds like that's part of how it works.
Yep. That's, we've all accepted it that we have to, if we want to have a sports team in our town every year, we have to spend hundreds of millions, or every so many years, we have to build them a $500 million stadium or whatever. So,
yeah, I said that's, and we're fortunate, like Green Bay Packers aren't going anywhere. Green Bay Packers are going to stay in Green Bay. But
there's no owner to sell them, so
right. But yeah, you see that other sports teams is picking up and moving several states away because they get a better deal, and it's like makes sense from a business standpoint. But what a dick move to the fans. Yeah, he oversaw the construction of a massive convention center in downtown Milwaukee, 1974. And then in January 1975, at only 53 years old, Gendusa dies. Strangely, a couple months later, in May 1975, his brother Jacob also dies at age 57. Young brothers. Mm-hmm. And his brother, not as well known, was the village president of West Milwaukee. So, little suburban thing little village next to Milwaukee.
I don't think I've ever seen West Milwaukee before.
I know, right? You've probably been in it and didn't even know. So, yeah, this was neat. And I wanted to add this stuff for context. And I'm going to throw this out. At this point, if anyone's still listening to this episode, if you're like a UW Milwaukee student and you're in the history department and you're looking for something to write about, I would say Robert Genduza would be an interesting guy to write about.
Because he's just done that much stuff?
Yeah, like most mayors have had something written about them. A couple have entire books, but some have, whatever written about them. Genduza has not. And I feel like, he was involved with a number of significant things throughout Milwaukee's history, but doesn't really have the name recognition. I bet you could write a really good, master's thesis on Genduza if you wanted to. So just throwing that out there. If someone's, it doesn't have to be UW Milwaukee, but if someone's, looking for a thesis to write, this might be a guy that you could look through the lens of his achievements and see Milwaukee from that angle. So throwing that out there.
Very cool. All right. Do you got anything else for this episode?
I do not. Like I said, this is basically the point of this one was just to kind of talk about the first real time that Robert Warren is moving into trying to take out what he sees as the things propping up Frank Bell-Street in Milwaukee, the bars and whatever else. He's going to come back on that in a much bigger way in the near future. So not the next episode, but soon we'll talk about it. And he gives 110%. He's not half-assing it when he comes back. So
you're very confident he had put everything he had into taking down the Mafia, huh?
Yeah, yeah, or at least what he saw as the problem. It's a little bit of overkill what he does, but maybe that's what he had to do. I don't know.
All right, well, we will be holding on for that one, and we'd like to thank everybody for their continued support of this podcast. Gavin, where can people reach out to you at?
They can email MilwaukeeMafia@gmail.com. They can find show notes at MilwaukeeMafia.com. Go ahead, email me. I'm really bad about it. I'm really bad about checking it. I did check my email yesterday. I had a guy asking me questions about, he was working on a project about a Chicago mob figure, and he had some questions. I got back to him same day.
So there you go.
So it happens. It happens. But yeah, I'm pretty bad about it. So, reach out, but I can't I'm just really bad with emails.
Well, he'll get to it though.
Yeah.
You'll hear back from him, which is more than probably most podcasts.
That's true. So. That's true.
So,
yeah, I guess that's right. Yeah. In addition to being a mediocre podcast host, I'm also a mediocre author, and most authors don't respond to mail at all. So yeah, at least I've got that going for me.
All right, with that, we'll wrap this up, and we will be back next week with the Patreon episode, and 2 weeks with another Mafia episode. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Milwaukee Mafia podcast. Join us next time for another look back at Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.